I feel like this season is filled with active players for better or for worse, and it's been a lot of fun watching this Big Brother 28 cast strategize around the clock. Week 1 had an interesting conclusion that saw the unanimous eviction of never had a burger before bartender Ashley after she leaked one side of the house to Melody prior to the eviction. While that downfall was entertaining to watch, Week 2 somehow managed to up the intrigue with more delusion, more active gameplay, and even more drama. So where do the remaining 16 house guests rank after 2 rounds of gameplay? Well, let's get into it. But before we dive into these rankings, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. We'll be looking for a winner all season long. Let's see if we can get this channel up to 300 subscribers by next week's episode. Also, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do that is by checking out my wife's Depop. Tell her Treeb sent you, link in the description. Coming in at dead last at number 16 and going down 5 spots, I have Jason. Jason's recklessness finally caught up to him in a pretty epic way after Devens won the HOH. It really feels like he got his just desserts for playing such a sloppy game. I think Jason has spent so much time trying to be the villain and dominate the screen time that it actually interfered with his game. One of Jason's biggest problems is that he always feels like he needs to be the one in control, and more importantly, he needs to let everybody else know it. Even with people in his own alliance, he's constantly sharing information he really shouldn't be, and that's completely tanked his game. He does have some relationships with Latrice, Rome, and Lyric, and he thinks he has Drew, but at this point, I don't really know how much any of those relationships matter. He's burned so much trust that it's hard to see anyone sticking their neck out for him. The one thing keeping him alive is that the current plan is still to backdoor Rome, so Jason technically isn't the target, but if Rome saves himself with the blockbuster, Jason will certainly be leaving on Thursday. Overall, Jason has played himself into one of the worst positions in the house. Even if he survives this week, he's going to have to completely rebuild his reputation because I don't think there's much respect left for his game. Now we're getting into a stretch of players who aren't on the block this week and are going to survive, but honestly, I'm pretty out on most of their games. I also really like the work that Rome and Lyric have been putting in this week, and with the possibility that Rome wins the blockbuster, these are the players I'm least optimistic about moving forward. Coming in at number 15 and not going up or down any spots, I have Haley. Haley's in a really tough spot. Honestly, she might be one of the most universally disliked players in the house right now. It honestly feels like she's become the scapegoat for everything in that house. She took the blame for the Angela and Latrice drama. She caught a lot of the fallout from Ashley's mistakes, and now she's somehow taking part of the blame for Jason ending up on the block. Rome has especially been vocal about this, calling her a bitch after the nomination ceremony and saying she's unbearable to live with. If Rome's side ever gets power, Haley is absolutely going to be one of the first targets. And even within her own alliance, she kind of feels like the designated fall guy if they ever need to sacrifice someone to protect their core. She gives off major Christmas Abbott vibes. Overall, I just don't see a clear path forward for Haley to win. She's safe because of the people around her, not because of the relationships that she's built herself, and that's never where you want to be in this game. And coming in at number 14 and going up 3 spots, I have Yash. I thought Yash did a really good job campaigning last week and selling his position. He found himself in a tough spot, and I think he did just about everything you could ask for someone on the block to do. Throughout his time on the block, I think people got to know Yash a little bit better. He came across as a pretty straightforward guy. He's going to compete his ass off, and for the most part, he's going to keep it a buck with you. He won the blockbuster competition to take himself off the block, which was obviously huge for him. Although I have to say, whenever Yash gets hyped, I get a little bit of secondhand embarrassment. Bro is such a cornball. That said, I still don't think he has that one ride or die relationship that makes me view him as a legitimate winner threat. He's improved his standing, but I don't know who his true number 1 is. I also think there's a portion of the house that he naturally rubs the wrong way. He definitely has a tendency to bro down with the guys and at times can come across a little misogynistic. Overall, I think this was a really good week for Yash, but I still think he's missing the core relationship that's almost necessary for someone to win Big Brother. And coming in at number 13 and going down 1 spot, we have Mallory. Let's talk about Mallory live right here, right now. She got kicked out of the trio alliance of Lyric, Melody, and herself, and honestly, I kind of feel bad for her because it's not like she really did anything wrong, and they're constantly trashing her name, which is very sad. I do think she's started talking a lot more game this week, and that's a positive. She's become a more valuable number for Rome's side, but I think she's running into the same problem that Melody has. She's still really close with the Drews and Barretts of the world, so a lot of the information she's sharing is just getting funneled right back to the people that she's working against. Plus, they're doing sneaky tactics under her nose, and she is very much aware of it. Drew has been trying to keep close tabs on her and pull her in, but to Mallory's credit, she's actually done a really good job of clocking Drew Drew's position. She pointed out during the first week that he spent a ton of time in Dee's HOH when he really should have been a nomination, but it's not like she could do anything about this because wherever she shares this information with, it's going to get right back to Drew, so she's in a very tough position. She's also super anti-vet at this point and wants to take that shot, but she doesn't really have a true number one anymore, and she kind of has Lyric, but she definitely is not Lyric's number one. I think that she's becoming more active strategically, but she lost her closest relationship, and if the Toolshed wins power again, I think she's an easy nominee and could easily become the target. Coming in at number 12 and going down 5 spots, I have Latrice. Latrice really hasn't given me much from a game perspective, and her week took a pretty big hit the second Devens won HOH. I think she's in that same tier as like a Taylor or a Yash, and before her eviction, Ashley, where she had some solid one-on-one relationships, but doesn't really have a group that's invested enough into keeping her around no matter what. We saw that play out when Rome was pitching names to Devens about who his untouchables were, and he named Jason and Lyric, but not Latrice. She got really emotional about this when Devens mentioned it during his nomination speech, which is understandable, but I don't think that this helped her perception in the house. I don't know where the path forward is because she feels expendable to almost everybody that she's working with at this point. And coming in at number 11 and going down 5 spots, I have Rome. Yes, finally Rome is here. This was a brutal week for Rome. He went from feeling like the president of the house to having emotional breakdowns, potentially losing his girl to his biggest enemies, and then getting backdoored. What's frustrating is I actually think Rome has a lot of potential. After week 1, I thought he had some of the most social capital in the house, and strategically, I don't think he's a bad player at all. The problem is he always found himself getting sucked back into the showmance with Lyric. I really think that relationship has blinded him to just how well positioned he actually was and what he could have accomplished. I also think he needed to sharpen his focus a little sooner, dial in his reads, and stop giving away so much information to people he wasn't directly aligned with. You even saw that after Devens won HOH. Rome immediately went upstairs and tried to add Devens to his 4 Seasons alliance with Drew, Jason, and Melody. That's what I mean when I say his head's in the right place. He's trying to be proactive, but walking up to the new HOH and asking him to become the 5th member to an already established alliance to save your girl is a little bit crazy to me. To Rome's credit, he and Lyric did come up with a really solid pitch later in the week. They offered Devens a deal where they wouldn't nominate him if he used the veto on Lyric, and if it works, you've got to give the pair their props because it's not the optimal play for Devens or the crossovers at all. I also like that Rome seems to be shifting his priorities. Early on, he was really locked in on targeting the red corner, especially Chuk and Haley, but after everything that happened this week, I think he's finally realizing the vets are the real power structure in the house. Unfortunately, I think this week did a ton of damage to his position. Unless he's gifted a power or wins the blockbuster, it's going to be really hard for him to recover. Either he's going home or he's losing one of his biggest numbers. Overall, I'm lower on Rome than I was a week ago, but I'm not completely out on him. I still think there's a good player in there somewhere. Coming in at number 10 and going down 1 spot, I have Chuk. Chuk is probably one of the hardest players for me to rank because on paper, he's in a pretty good spot. He's in the majority alliance and he isn't really anyone's number 1 target. That said, I think the house's perception of him has dropped pretty rapidly over the last week. A big reason for that is he just doesn't socialize much outside of his own alliance. He's kind of taking his own position by not building relationships with the other side of the house. He has said that he's intentionally slow playing the game, and maybe that's true, but from what we've seen, he's just not given me much to work with. The one interesting wrinkle is that he seems to be becoming Lyric's rebound option if Rome leaves. That could benefit his game, although I'm not entirely sure to what extent. Lyric already jumped ship once, so I don't really know how much I trust that relationship long term. Overall, Chuk feels like a player who's in a solid position because of the people around him, not because anything he's actively doing. Coming in at number 9 and going up 5 spots, I have Taylor. There were so many things happening around Taylor in her game last week, but she really wasn't doing much to actively affect the outcome. When the vote was at its most fluid, Ashley and Yash were out there fighting for their lives while Taylor was mostly isolating herself. That's usually not a great sign when you're trying to evaluate someone's winning chances. Granted, the vote eventually got to a point where Taylor wasn't going home, but it wasn't because of anything she was actively doing. It was because Ashley was going around taking her own game. So I guess in a weird way, staying in bed actually worked out for Taylor. I will say early last week, she did a decent job trying to insulate herself. Her conversations with Dee about not targeting her really paid dividends. Dee even told her that if the vote ended in a tie, she'd break it in Taylor's favor. Taylor has some solid relationships. She has a really tight bond with Latrice, and she seems to have built a workable relationship with Dee as well. Overall, I do think Taylor is objectively in a better spot than she was a week ago, just not by too much. And coming in at number 8 and going up 5 spots, I have Melody. I actually think Melody has some of the better reads in the house. The problem is she just doesn't have the agency or social capital to do anything with those reads. I also think she's trying really hard to get in with people, but unfortunately she's kind of become the most disposable number for both sides of the house. One issue is that Melody is very outward with her game. She's extremely open with conversations and information, so I don't think she's under the radar enough. Everybody knows Melody is playing hard, and I think that's pretty damning for her. That said, I do think she's done some solid active gameplay this week. She won some favor with Kamu by throwing Mallory under the bus and leaning into a relationship with Drew, which was smart because Kamu already likes Drew and they're actually forming an unlikely pair right now. I actually think this could end up being a sneaky trio down the line. She's on the block, but I do think she's avoided immediate danger and will be safe this week. I still think most of her longevity comes from being attached to Drew though. She's more likely to get dragged along for the ride than to dictate where the game goes herself. Overall, I think Melody is playing hard, but until she becomes someone people actively want to keep around instead of someone who's useful because of who she's attached to, I have a hard time seeing her emerge as a real winner threat. Coming in at number 7 and going up 1 spot, I have Lyric, and I have some crow to eat here for Lyric because I think she had a pretty impressive week. Lyric made, as Q from Survivor would say, a big mistake before Devens even won HOH. She was so hesitant to talk game with anyone outside of her core that she never really built anything with Devens, and even when she went up there to try to talk game with him, she was not giving him much, and I think that's a huge reason why she ended up on the block. That's especially tough because Devens actually really got along pretty well with Rome up to this point, and if Lyric had given Devens anything before he won HOH, I honestly don't think she'd be sitting in this position, but she really did show that she can work very well from the bottom. She's been pretty openly distancing herself from Rome, and honestly, she's not exactly being subtle about it. After watching how Melody distancing herself from Mallory was received last week, I didn't think this strategy would work nearly as well, but somehow it actually seems to be paying off a little bit. She's openly cuddling with Chuk, flirting with some of the guys. Even when people say they know exactly what she's doing, they're still participating in it, which is just kind of hilarious. The biggest play though was a plan that her and Rome came up to pitch Devens to make sure that he would stay off the block next week if Rome and Lyric were to get into power. She's also done a really good job getting Dee on board with this idea. On top of that, Chuk and Haley have now also started pushing for Devens to use the veto on Lyric. It's honestly crazy that this breakup plan from Rome and Lyric actually worked. I said after week 1 that both Rome and Lyric just needed to zoom out and focus on the game more, and I think having their backs against the wall has forced them to do exactly that. Will the plan actually work? I'm not sure. Either way, I think Lyric is probably here next week, and I actually think she's doing a much better job of setting herself up for success moving forward. Coming in at number 6 and going down 1 spot, I have Barrett. Barrett probably has the closest relationship with Dee in the house, and it's bordering on a showmance, and I think it's starting to become a problem for both of their games. The way they originally wanted to structure their alliance with the crossovers in the red corner was with a parachute strategy, which was really smart, but the closer Barrett and Dee get, the more people are starting to connect the two instead of associating Dee with the red corner. I think we're already seeing that hurt both of their position. A good example is Mallory. After Melody dropped her, Barrett did a really nice job of pulling Mallory in as a parachute alliance, but ever since he's gotten close to Dee, who is basically Mallory's biggest enemy, that relationship has completely stalled out. He even tried to deny being at that big tool shed meeting before eventually admitting he was there. That is just a huge fumble by Barrett, and I think it's starting to show how much his relationship with Dee is starting to cost him elsewhere in the house. In a lot of ways, Barrett actually reminds me of Chuk. He doesn't really socialize or strategize with people he isn't directly aligned with. Overall, I still think Barrett is in a good position because of the alliance he's in, but I definitely like him less than I did a week ago. His relationship with Dee has gone from being a huge asset to something people are actively noticing, and if they don't create a little more distance soon, I think it could become a real problem for both of them. And coming in at number 5 and going up 5 spots, I have Kamu. I actually like Kamu. I think he's a pretty strong social player. My biggest criticism of Kamu after week 1 was that he spent way too much time trying to control Dee's HOH. I think in his head he was running things, but in reality he didn't get the initial nominees that he wanted, he didn't get the replacement nominee that he wanted, and he didn't get the vote that he was pushing for either. He was kind of whiffing left and right while getting misted into thinking he had more influence than he actually did. This week felt like a complete contrast. He was still incredibly active, but this time his influence actually started showing up. He's also done a really good job protecting himself himself simply by being active. He's constantly having conversations. He's built goodwill with people on both sides of the house. And unlike someone like Chuk or Haley, he really hasn't rubbed many people the wrong way. I also like some of the smaller things he did this week. Telling Yash he didn't have the votes to stay over Taylor because Rome was gathering them was the right move. On top of that, I think he's built some solid one-on-one relationships with Drew, Melody, and Yash. Overall, I think this was a really nice rebound for Kamu. He was just as active as he was during Dee's HOH, but this time it felt like he was actively advancing his game instead of trying to run someone else's. I still think he has some blind spots, but I'm definitely higher on him than I was a week ago. Coming in at number 4 and going down 2 spots, I have Dee. I'm still really high on Dee, just not as high as most people seem to be. I think the crossovers battle for power in the late game is going to be fascinating, and right now I think it's shaping up to be Dee versus Drew. To me, they're the two players with the most outside relationships, but I actually think Drew's relationships have more longevity. More importantly, I think there are fewer people willing to nominate Drew before the end game than there are Dee. I also didn't expect Dee to become this attached to Barrett. They're getting really close, and honestly, I think that relationship could ultimately become her downfall. The whole point of the red corner was to use those players as parachutes, but the more obvious Dee and Barrett become as a pair, the more likely they are to end up on the block together. Now let's compare that to Drew, where he's quietly maintained relationships with people like Melody, Rome, and Mallory, and I don't think any of these players are rushing to nominate him or even vote him out anytime soon. Dee, on the other hand, doesn't have quite that same insulation. If she ended up on the block, I actually think she'd have a much harder time gathering votes than Drew would in a similar spot. I also think Devens showed this week that he has more influence over some of Dee's numbers than Dee does herself. Last week, he was able to convince Kamu where the vote should go, even though Kamu is ideally one of Dee's people. Meanwhile, Dee has kind of isolated herself from Kamu over the last couple of days, and now it feels like Angela and Devens both have stronger relationships with him than she does. Overall, Dee is still in one of the best positions in the house. I just think some of the cracks are starting to show. And coming in at number 3 and going up 1 spot, I have Devens. Earlier in the week, I started getting a feeling that this relationship between Devens and Rome was really interesting because the more they talked, the more Devens seemed to genuinely like him. He even talked to himself and said something like, "I like Rome maybe a little too much." Little did I know Devens was going to cut that relationship off way sooner than I expected. He nominated Rome's closest allies, declared war, and basically threw Rome under the bus in 1 week's time. The impressive part is that despite all of that, it still feels like Haley has taken more of the heat than Devens has. Devens and Rome honestly don't seem to be on terrible terms considering everything that's happened, and being able to salvage that relationship is pretty impressive. I also think Devens has done a really good job getting closer to Kamu. I also think this was the perfect HOH for Devens to win. He gets to take a shot at someone like Jason, who's been throwing his name around, while also putting himself in an incredible position with the incoming powers. My one concern is how he's handling the veto right now. If he really keeps Melody on the block just to get a read on Drew or do some kind of heat check, I actually think that's a mistake. You might gain a little favor with Rome and Lyric after burning them all week. Along the same lines, I'm also not a fan of using the veto on Lyric if both Rome and Lyric survive this week. I think that's a much bigger problems for Devens, especially because they could always just go back on this deal, which is more than likely. Overall, I still think Devens had a pretty solid week 2 HOH. My only concern is that he's starting to overcomplicate the end of this HOH reign, and I think sticking to the original plan would leave him in the strongest position moving forward. Coming in at number 2 and going down 1 spot, I have Angela. You got to give Angela credit. It took her into the 2nd week to have a crash out in front of the whole house, but this is Big Brother 28 Angela, and somehow it didn't really backfire. She's done a really good job gaming around the clock, even if some of her reads and decisions are fueled by paranoia. She's also managed to repair her relationship with Latrice, who at one point was probably one of her biggest ops in the house, and even if the backdoor somehow doesn't happen or Rome ends up winning the blockbuster, one of her biggest ops and Jason still likely walks out the door. That's what I've been most impressed by. She's strengthened her relationships with people like Kamu, expanded her influence, and it honestly feels like she's helping steer the direction of the game. Now, she still does some classic Angela things. She's somehow still skeptical of Drew, and she even told Devens not to tell Drew anything they had going on. Overall, I continue to be really impressed with Angela's game. She's still a little chaotic, and she's always going to have those Angela moments, but unlike last season, she's actually channeling that energy. I honestly think she's in one of the strongest positions in the house right now. And coming in at number 1 and going up 2 spots, I have Drew. I still think Drew might have the most social capital in the entire house. He has more information on people than almost anyone else, and somehow people still don't have much information on him. You have to give him props for immediately telling his alliance about Jason targeting Devens and Angela. He handled that information exactly the way that he should have, and it should have earned him a ton of respect within that group. That said, it feels like people are slowly starting to clock just how well positioned he is. The icons have been talking about it, and Angela in particular seems really skeptical of him. The funny part is that Angela's paranoia isn't even rooted in something real. She thinks Drew isn't being truthful with the information he's bringing back, when in reality he is. But even if this read is wrong, I do think it's made players like Devens and Dee a little more aware of how connected Drew actually is. I also continue to be really impressed with his relationship with Melody. Every time Melody starts drifting away from him, Drew somehow reels her back in. He's done an incredible job managing that relationship, and I think it's going to be huge for him moving forward. And he's also the only crossovers player that has maintained their parachute alliance really at all. It's not just Melody either. Rome's side still legitimately believes they have Drew. On top of that, he's quietly built a really strong relationship with Kamu. Apparently those two are even the reason the alliance is called the Tool Shed, and they have their own duo name called the Handymen. And even after the nomination ceremony, Rome's side still didn't clock Drew despite him being in that massive HOH meeting. They genuinely think they have him, which is just nuts. The one thing that does concern me is what happened after the veto. It feels like more people are interested in keeping Melody on the block, specifically to weaken Drew's position, or to at least get a sense on what his position is. And honestly, I don't know what else this guy has to do to prove to his own alliance that he's with them. He tells them everything, and I kind of fear for him here. Right now, I think Drew is in the best position of the house. Someone commented on one of my videos saying he has Tyler Crispin upside, and honestly, I kind of see it. Even when people like Rome, Mallory, or Melody start to clock him, he somehow still finds a way to reel them back in, and that's a special skill, and that's why I have him at number 1. Alrighty, guys, thank you guys so much for listening to my Week 2 Big Brother 28 Power Rankings. What do you guys think? Did I have anybody ranked too high, too low? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, let me know your player rankings and why you have people where they're at. I love reading those. And also, check the links in the description. Check out my wife's Depop, buy something there, and read my articles. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.